So when Danger Dolan was little, he told me that he was scared of monsters that would come out of the darkest corners of the bedroom, the dark corners that his little nightlight just couldn't reach. So one night his mother told him that when he falls asleep, that's when the monsters would come out, but his stuffed animals would also come alive. She said that they would always fight the monsters until he would wake up. That made it much easier for Dolan to sleep, although he was still scared that one day they might fail. Honeybits was in a dark house at night and was supposed to be meeting up with some others so that they could investigate the supposedly haunted house. She couldn't find anyone though, and was all alone in the home. There was a maze of dark hallways, and Honeybits had this constant feeling of being watched. Around her, she could hear chuckling and giggling and knocking on the walls. Honeybits saw a glass door to the outside and rushed towards it to the exit. However, it suddenly locked in front of her. Shocked, she turned around, and the ghost of a little girl was standing right there whispering, "No, no, no," over and over. She freaked out and ran back down the hallway, and as she did, the walls began to morph into eyeballs that went in and out of the walls, staring at her. There were huge mouths with sharp teeth that would appear to try and bite her. The floor started to roll like there was an earthquake. Honeybits fell and started crawling and stumbling around. There was maniacal laughter all around her, and she could even hear a chainsaw getting closer. She got extremely dizzy and fainted before getting absorbed by a wall. When she woke up, Honeybits was laying in a bed in a small gray room. It was quiet and calm. And then she realized that there was no door. She started to panic but realized that she was paralyzed. The walls started closing in on her, and from the corner of the room, a huge demonic face formed and stared right at her. It just laughed and laughed at her as the walls got tighter and tighter until they crushed her to death, and only then did she wake up.
The dumbest excuse James Shark had ever heard is when he was about to go to a friend's house for a sleepover. They said James Shark couldn't come over yet because they were taking a shower and that he could come later. James Shark waited a few hours later and called again. They said they were still in the shower. At that point, he knew he was being blown off and just stopped calling because his friend obviously didn't want him to come over. The next day, the friend's mother told James Shark that his friend actually was really busy and didn't want to tell him he couldn't come. So instead, he came up with the old infinite shower excuse.
Pandora used to work at an after-school daycare when she was in high school. Pandora didn't shave her legs, and one day it was super hot and she wore shorts to work. The kids were amazed with her leg hair. One of the children asked Pandora why her legs were like that, since all the other female workers shaved. She started to give the kids a lesson on how they can make their own personal choices when one of the kids shouted out, "Miss, are you a werewolf?" The kids erupted into questions about full moons and transformations. Pandora pretty much ran with it and never corrected them.
Tolop was visiting his friend's house, where they were hanging out with their friend's 3-year-old cousin. The 3-year-old was really getting on Tolop's nerves. He was tearing apart the garden, ripping out plants, and throwing rocks. He politely asked the child to stop when he replied with, "I don't have time to listen to you. I only listen to my dad." So Tolop blurted out, "Actually, I am your dad now, so stop digging the garden." For some reason, the kid believed him and followed him around calling him daddy for the rest of the day. Even when the kid's actual dad arrived to take him home, he yelled, "Bye, second daddy." When Emoji was 9, he was a big YouTube fan. One day, he came home from school to watch the latest PewDiePie video. In the video, a hater told PewDiePie that he sucked, and PewDiePie responded by saying, "You swallow." Emoji didn't understand what this meant, but he thought it was pretty funny. Later that day, Emoji was in the kitchen with his mom. After joking around, his mom playfully told him that he sucked. Emoji laughed, looked his mom square in the eye, and said, "Well, you swallow." His mom's face went totally white. Emoji knew he'd said something wrong. He thought it had something to do with foods and drinks, so his mom had to awkwardly explain it's more sexual meaning. Emoji excused himself, saying, "I'm gonna go die in a hole now." He still cringes whenever he remembers this.
When Pandora was in high school, she was dating a guy who had left their hometown to go to college. She was missing him badly one day, so she checked his Instagram to see if he had uploaded any pictures of himself. What she found were pictures of him and a mysterious woman who he tagged as baby with a heart emoji. There were hundreds of the pictures of the two of them, and he'd even written, "My baby is the only woman I will ever love." She immediately blocked his lying ass. Needless to say, she doesn't miss him anymore.
One day, when James Shark was a freshman at his new school, he decided to bring firecrackers. As he was lighting them, his water polo coach came out and immediately made him pick them up using his bare hands. Next, while wearing nothing but his jammers, James Shark was forced to run around the pool while the firecrackers that were slung over his shoulder began to burst on his back. He ended up in the hospital with his back on ice. At least his coach ended up getting fired.
Andy had a severe asthma attack back when she was in school, so her bullies thought it would be a good idea to torment her by spraying perfume in the classrooms, doorways, hallways, pretty much anywhere. It would make it hard for Andy to get around. If she tried to go where the bullies sprayed the perfume, she would have an asthma attack. Andy was even hospitalized more than once because of it.
One time, Andy was at her house with her brother. Her brother was in the kitchen recording something. About 5 minutes after he began recording, she began to smell smoke while hearing him scream. She rushed into the kitchen and saw him wearing gloves, with one of them on fire. A panicked Andy rushed to the sink, filled a bowl with water, and threw it at the fiery glove. After a few tries, the fire was extinguished. His hand had to be wrapped in bandages because it was so badly burnt. When she asked him what the hell he was doing, he told her that he set the glove on fire because he thought it would protect him. That was the moment Andy knew her brother was an idiot.
When Pringle was 10, he was a big weirdo who loved the taste of flour. He loved it so much that he would wait until midnight, then sneak into the kitchen to binge eat flour out of the bag. Sometimes he would stuff his whole mouth with flour and walk back to his room to just eat it slowly. Now, after 2 months of this binge eating addiction, Pringle threw up at 2 a.m. The noise ended up waking up his parents, and they discovered his shameful secret. The next morning, they enforced a strict 2-week ban on eating cooking ingredients. It was the roughest time of Pringle's life.
One Thanksgiving, when Hellbent was 8 years old, his brother rushed into the room out of nowhere, sobbing hysterically to their dad that his stomach felt really bad. "It hurts so much," he yelled. A moment later, Hellbent's brother let loose the raunchiest, meatiest man fart he'd ever heard. Even his dad looked impressed. His sobbing expression immediately changed into a cheery grin. "I feel better," he chirped, and ran off back to play with his Legos again, leaving Hellbent and his dad to just stare at each other in astonishment. How could something so huge have come from someone so small? The world may never know.
Last summer, Zaraganba got a job as a lifeguard at a public pool. One day, while he was supervising the pool, his boss came to him and said, "Hey, if you go and kick that kid into the pool, I'll double your salary." At the time, Zaraganba was desperate for money, so he went over and kicked the kid. The only problem was, the kid didn't actually fall into the pool. And when he turned around, Zaraganba realized the kid was actually really jacked. He was so mad about being kicked that he kneed Zaraganba in the head, knocking him unconscious. When he woke up, he was in the hospital. The worst part was, his boss didn't even double his salary.
Tulip was a shy kid growing up and would sit all by himself at lunch. One day, out of nowhere, a girl, Spencer, sat down next to him and asked, "Is our seat taken?" Tulip started panicking, so being the shy, dumb kid he was, he tried to flirt by saying something like, "Did you fall from heaven?" After fumbling around with it in his head, he ended up saying, "When flies get fruit from hell." Spencer looked at him dumbfounded. She walked away and didn't talk to him for a year. But 2 years later, she became his girlfriend.
One time, Pringle had a wild night out with his friends. He drank so much that night that he completely blacked out. He later woke up in the middle of the night needing to pee. Pringle stumbled into the bathroom and pulled out one of his balls instead of his dick by mistake. He then stood there peeing his pants, thinking he was pissing in the bowl. It was not Pringle's finest moment.
One of the weirdest encounters I had was one time when I came out of the club. This was during my stay in England. I was having a great time, and whenever I go to the club, I don't actually drink. I was pretty sober for the most part, and I just go out there to dance. So by the time I got out the club, there was a bum in the corner, and it seemed like he had something in his pocket. I don't know what it was, but he just kept moving it. So then he screamed to me, "Hey you, hey, come here you." And then I was kind of freaked out. I was like, oh man, I really don't want to mess with anybody right now. Please just let me go home. I just want to go to sleep. I had a good night. Please don't mess it up. And it was a Friday too. So he kept bugging me and he was telling me, "Hey, I told you to come here. I want to show you something." So then I walked very carefully because I wasn't too sure. It could have been knifed, could have been a gun. You never know. You just never know. So I walked up to him and then he told me this. "Hey man, I want to show you something. It's in my pocket. You think you could reach for it?" As he told me that, I saw him and he was just moving his hand inside his pocket, up and down. After that, I was freaked out and I ran immediately. As I was running, he went and screamed out something again. He said this. I just wanted to show you something." I saw some sort of liquid hit the floor and I was extremely freaked out.
Doopy wore dresses all the time when she was younger. In 8th grade, she walked to the store in her favorite dress when she noticed a man walking behind her. She had seen him before and just thought that he was going to the same store. When she got to an intersection, Doopy stopped and waited for a chance to cross. Suddenly, the man reached down and lifted her skirt. He smirked and said, "Nice underwear. When's the next date?" She punched him so hard in the face that he fell to the ground. Doopy proceeded to kick him in the chest. Just as the light turned green, she ran across the street and into the store. After that day, Doopy never wore dresses again. Unless she decided to wear shorts underneath.
Robo stayed up in her bedroom one night when she was home alone. Suddenly, she heard something fall in the kitchen. She went to go check it out. When she was walking back to her bedroom, Robo saw a tall figure. Believing it was her father, she said, "Hey, Dad." But it just stared back at her with its transparent, glowing white eyes. The figure walked into the bathroom. When Robo pursued, she walked into an empty room with no one in sight. Robo hasn't seen the figure or anything like it since.
Hellbent was in the act with his girlfriend when he was young, and she said that she wanted him to wear a dress while they performed. Hellbent hated the idea, but he loved her a lot, and he owed her for something. A week later, he obliged, and he wore the dress. And guess what? While they were in the middle of the action, her dad walked in on them. He could never look his girlfriend's dad in the eyes ever again. And to this day, Hellbent always makes sure the door is locked.
When he was at school, Dolan was on his phone during free time when his friend came up to him and told him that he should do something to impress Gooby. He gave Dolan some ideas of what he should do. Dolan said,
"I'll do a backflip off the second balcony."
His friend thought he was crazy, but Dolan said,
"Dude, have some faith in me. Tell everyone in the school except for the teachers."
He ran off while Dolan got ready. He came back with everyone from the school. The fun room below them didn't have a roof, so someone placed a trampoline on the floor to break Dolan's fall. When he jumped, Dolan landed on the trampoline. Hard. It was such a hard fall that he ended up breaking his ankle. At the end, it was worth it, because Gooby became his girlfriend.
Dean the Time Wanderer was 16 when he got his first job at Walmart. He saw lots of weird stuff in this job, but the strangest thing by far was when a gang of furries came in. Dean was innocently talking to a coworker when 15 people wearing fursuits came in, riding on shopping carts. They swore, and they shouted, and they knocked stuff over. When Dean's boss tried to get them to settle down, they tackled him to the ground. After causing a huge mess, they eventually got bored and left, but not before buying 20 cans of cat food on their way out.
Saraganba's dream had him running down the street chasing a van with a foreign language written on it. Saraganba fell into a hole, and the van parked right over the top of the hole. To get out, he pushed the van over onto its side. He thought he was the strongest person alive, so he went around pushing over everything he could find. The dream was cool, But when he woke up, he realized he was sleepwalking, pushing over chairs, dressers, and basically all the furniture in his room.
Honeybits had a teacher in 2nd grade who just snapped one day. Being clumsy, Honeybits dropped her pencil and got up to pick it up. As soon as she did, the teacher yelled, "Hey! Why are you standing?" Honeybits replied, "Well, I... The teacher interrupted with, "No, I've heard that excuse many times. You know what? I've had it!" She duct taped Honeybits to the desk so that she couldn't move, and then she duct taped her mouth so that she couldn't talk. Anybody caught trying to help her was also duct taped to their desk. Honeybits and the people who tried to help her were stuck like that for 2 hours, and when their parents called the school looking for them, the principal found them in the dark. Their teacher was arrested and served a 3-year sentence.
Ramona and her boyfriend had been dating for about a year. One day, he asked her if she wanted to go to Paris. Very excited, she agreed. Then, that night, he took her to a fancy restaurant. It was fine until their glasses of wine arrived. Ramona took a long sip until she felt something roll down her throat. She began to choke, shattering her glass on the floor. The waiter came up from behind and gave her the Heimlich. After a while, she spat out a shiny ring with a large diamond. When Ramona looked up at her boyfriend, he happily said, "Surprise!" When I was in junior high, one of my teachers gave me the heebie-jeebies. Every day after class, he'd pull me aside just to talk to me. It was always about weird, random conversations, as if he was making excuses to talk to me. The weirdest thing he asked me was if I joined the girls' track team because I, quote, had the perfect legs for it. Eventually, I started rushing out of class before he could pull me aside. He wasn't exactly a stranger, but he didn't know me either. Creepy. Tulip was in his 1st grade reading class and was trying to read what the teacher ordered him to read. It said, "The clock tells time, the car fell in the ditch." Well, the funny thing is that he didn't know what the fuck he was reading that week. Plus, he never studied. Tulip replied,
The cocktail's time, the car is a bitch.
The teacher looked at him, and then back to her book, then at him again, and told him to get out.
Back when she was in 8th grade, Froggy had a boyfriend who said that he loved her. One day though, she broke up with him because she caught him cheating on her. Some time later, she was sitting on her porch when her ex came up to her. He said he needed to talk to her, so Froggy took him inside her house because her mother wasn't home. They sat on the couch to talk, but instead of talking, her ex stood up and took his pants and underwear off. He then began giving Froggy a lap dance. After a few seconds of yelling at him to get off her, he obeyed. But not before taking a strand of her hair to remember her. And Froggy never saw him again.
In school, Kyle M was so bored in his typing class that he decided to raise his hand. When the teacher called on him, Kyle M said to her, "I wanted to tell you a farmer's joke, but it was corny." Nobody laughed. Nobody reacted. Some kid at the back let out an awkward cough. Even the teacher just sighed. He thought he would at least get some reaction, but he got nothing. A few seconds later, he got up and he screamed, "I'm a special snowflake, okay?" He sure got a reaction that time. His teacher gave him detention for a week.
When Doopy was 7, she had a weird dream about her and her sisters having to save Santa Claus, despite it being the middle of June. They were pulled from their beds and shot up invisible chutes to the North Pole. Santa was very sick, and Doopy and her sisters had to travel the world to gather ingredients for a special soup that would make him feel all better. The elves took them down invisible slides to travel across the globe to look for the ingredients. When the ingredients were gathered, Doopy and her sisters made the soup and gave it to Santa, making him feel better instantly. Then they were magically sent back to their beds. The next day, Doopy woke up feeling very tired, which made her question whether or not it was even a dream.
Back when Andy was in 7th grade, she had this huge crush on a boy. He would sit a couple of seats away from her at lunch, and she would steal glances at him the entire time. One day, while looking at him, Andy decided to mess with the extra ketchup packets she had on her tray. She started to twist them in the middle to make them look like tiny little bow ties. She kept on twisting one until it exploded, spraying ketchup directly onto her crush's shirt. He then proceeded to curse at Andy, shouting at her for ruining his, quote, $150 shirt, end quote. All around them, people were snickering and muttering awful things about her. Andy was mortified. Her cheeks turned red, and she got kicked out of the lunchroom for the entire day. After that incident, she lost all interest in him and made sure that she never twisted her ketchup packets during lunch ever again, no matter what adorable shapes they might make. Sidious was in school with a friend, and they were pretty bored. He said to his friend, "Hey dude, you want to hear a joke?" And he said sure. So Sidious began. He said, "A guy wakes up in the morning and he digs a 10-meter hole. The next day he goes back and digs another 10 meters, and another, and another." He repeated the last line until his friend said, "Dude, stop. That isn't even funny." To which Sidious replied, "It might not be that funny, but you can't deny it's not deep." Sidious snort laughed until he realized that his friend wasn't laughing, or even smiling. And then they just went back to sitting in silence. Snoopy was dating a guy she met on a dating app. He had a son, and she really liked the both of them. She even went out and bought the two of them a GameCube for Christmas. Snoopy was trying to plan a date to give it to him, so she texted him to ask him what his plans were on Sunday. He literally replied to her with, "I already have a date with my girlfriend." Snoopy was obviously confused, as she thought she was his girlfriend. He started rambling on about how they don't have chemistry and, all those lame excuses. Snoopy was so shocked, she didn't even reply. Later that day, he made a Facebook post whining about how much his life sucked and that she broke up with him at a bad time. Snoopy ended up giving the GameCube to her nephew.
One time, Ramona had one of the most common dreams ever. She dreamt that she had floated up off the ground and was flying among the clouds. You might think, hey, that doesn't sound like a nightmare. Sounds like fun. But after 10 seconds of enjoying herself, she suddenly remembered that she is incredibly afraid of heights. She realized that humans weren't meant to be hundreds of feet in the air, and that she could plummet toward death at any moment. As her flying abilities faded, Ramona screamed and screamed. The beautiful blue sky around her suddenly turned dark. She woke up seconds before she crashed into disgusting dirty water. Her heart was pounding, but she was very glad to have 2 feet firmly on the ground.
When Andy was little, her parents would often leave her home alone because she was responsible and looked older than she was. Of course, whenever they were gone, Andy would just roll on the floor, eat cranberry sauce, and play the theme song to iCarly while just wearing her underwear. One day, Andy's dad came home an hour early, and there she was on the floor in her underwear, eating cranberry sauce with iCarly on the highest volume. Her dad still makes fun of her to this day.
One time in 2nd grade, I was going to meet my mum after school to go shopping for new clothes. The store was just around the corner, so I had no reason to be late, but I got caught up with some friends and ended up being about half an hour late. As an unusual punishment for that one, my mum made me wear 4 watches for 4 weeks. And she communicated it with the school to make sure that they were enforcing it. So I had to walk around like a dork for 4 weeks with 4 watches on. I was still late for stuff you can't change me.
One time in high school, Snoopy went to the bathroom and saw 2 girls arguing over a boy. The arguing turned into shouting, and then they started pulling each other's hair and pinching each other's arms. Snoopy thought they were gonna start throwing punches, when all of a sudden one of the girls leaned in close and kissed the other on the lips. Snoopy decided to walk out slowly and gave them some privacy, even though she still really needed to use the bathroom. A week later, Snoopy saw these 2 walking around school holding hands and kissing. They actually became a couple after their weird kiss in the middle of a fight.
Gooby's sister Snoopy used to be really impressionable when she was younger. She couldn't really tell the difference between things that are real and things that are completely fictional. So one day, Gooby decided to show Snoopy this little old cartoon called, that's right, Dragon Ball. In the episode, Gohan screams before going Super Saiyan. Snoopy watched it carefully, taking notes. And then, after the episode finished, she went out into the front yard and started screaming at the sky, waiting to go Super Saiyan. Needless to say, Gooby had to give Snoopy the disappointing news.
In primary school, when Gergak was 9 years old, a teacher gave him a 10-minute detention for holding the handrail while walking up the stairs to go to class. When Gergak asked why, she said that by holding the handrail, he was taking the mickey out of old people because he was too young to use it. To make matters worse, when Gergak said,
Come on, but that's really unfair.
she doubled his detention. The most dangerous situation Mikhailum has been in was when he was 14. He was staying at his grandparents when one day he went to his aunt's house to see his cousins. His aunt had this ATV Ranger, and she asked Mikhailum if he wanted to drive it. He didn't want to, but she persisted and he eventually gave in. His two little cousins rode with him and they drove around a bit. One of his cousins kept telling him to go faster and make fast turns. And being the dumb shit that he was, Mikhailum did it, but then went a little too fast. The Ranger flew into the air and ejected Mikhailum, with him hitting his jaw on the ATV and breaking it. For a few minutes, he couldn't even breathe. He wasn't afraid, but he was thinking,
well, this is how I die.
But then Mikhailum started to breathe again, so he got up and got his cousins out of the ATV. They walked back to the house with Mikhailum texting his mom that he broke his jaw. He did get a cool cheek scar out of it though. You don't want to fuck with me. I crashed an ATV.